Dear respected Thai, dear noble community, today is the 22nd of December in 2021, 3 days to Christmas, and it's already beautifully decorated for our holiday retreat. And we've been studying the 40 tenets of Plum. So the 28th tenet. Liberation it's a good start. Liberation from Samsāra does not mean putting an end to the personal self. There's a word in Sanskrit, pudgala. It means in this class we've been playing with Sanskrit, a little bit of Vietnamese, occasionally Chinese, just for fun. So you may know self is an Atman, or in Pali, anatta. And we already learned about the concentration on non-self, as well as no self as one of the seals of the Dharma. And when we talk about the self as a person, right, because we also have the non-self quality of all things, like Dhammas, for example. We can use the word pudgala. So when we're talking about the person, the self as a person, the technical term, well, actually it's a technical term, but it's also just a common term for person. It's just the word person, pudgala. So liberation from samsara does not mean putting an end to the personal self, because that person is not a real entity anyway. So how can you put an end to something which was never there in the first place? This is the main point. And we have people who ask questions sometimes in the Q&A, I can't get rid of my ego. And there's this sense that, almost an assumption when we come to Buddhist practice, that we have to somehow destroy the self or get rid of ourself, or become free from our ego, which is like it's some kind of monster, which is kind of coming over our mind, over us in our worst nightmares, to with its long fangs and. I mean, and really, it's not to discount the experience that people have of this, of feeling trapped or controlled by an ego, or that they maybe a sense of kind of self-loathing that may happen, where we want to just reject anything that might be ourself or me, and that's very real. This kind of it's kind of like emotional sabotage, and so we might express that as like, I'm just sick of myself. I'm sick of, and we just want to get rid of ourselves. And so we think, well, Buddhism talks about no self, so maybe I'll become a Buddhist and I'll practice. And what we find if we look deeply is that Buddhism is not about destroying the self or getting rid of our ego. It's the insight that it was never there in the first place, that our idea of a self or an ego is just a notion. It's an aggregate, sometimes an aggregate of perceptions that we just continue to maintain over and over and develop and grow. And but it has no essence. There's nothing there, as it were. And in this chapter, in the talk for this tenet, I use the example of a sculptor who takes a block of wood and he sculpts a god. And when he finishes, he looks at it and he becomes terrified because he sees the God that he's created, and he bows down before that sculpture of the God, of God. And he says, this is very strange, because this is a block of wood, and the sculptor has, with his own hands, he has carved this image, and then he becomes terrified because of what it looks like. And so he said, that is what we do with our mind. We create an image of ourselves, and then we become terrified of it. We want to get rid of it. And so, yeah, we use these means to try to destroy the self. And it's very violent. Yeah, so we bring violence to ourselves, to our own mind. This can be very dangerous. So I already shared many times about these monks that had each other kill each other and committed suicide because they had a wrong understanding of disgust towards the body. And the Buddha taught about disgust towards the body in order to overcome attachment. So because we perceive the body as being beautiful, and we lust after other people's bodies. And so in order to help monks to overcome that attachment, then he taught about ways to practice looking at the unpleasant aspects of our body, like that we're all carrying around feces in our bowel, we have these intestines here. That always helps me when I get caught in desiring somebody's body. I just start to see, like I imagine with the skin like kind of pulled back and see what it looks like. And then it's not so attractive anymore. But that's not imagination. I mean, that's a technique, it's a meditative technique, but that's real. I mean, that's just we're just covered by this thin layer of skin. But these monks, they misunderstood the Buddha, and they thought we need to kill ourselves because this body is so repulsive. And so that's a wrong understanding. And so the same thing can happen in our mind if we think that we need to destroy ourselves or somehow get rid of ourselves. The point is to get the insight that it was never there in the first place, that what we think of as ourself is just a series of perceptions, notions, concepts. Just like the sculptor who's had the image of the god and who carves it in wood. And so that's for the sake of our freedom that teaching happens. It doesn't mean that I'm not Brother Phap Luu, this is not Kan and Wouter and so forth, right? It means that ultimately those are just names and forms. For convenience sake, you know, if we had we just had the Mahasangha meeting for the holiday retreat, and if we say, like Yusuf is doing, what, washing up or?
Kitchen cleaning.
Huh? Kitchen cleaning, right? And Wouter shows up, then we have a problem, right? So it's just for the sake of convention, we use names and forms, but ultimately we know that there's not like a fundamental Yusuf, right? That is somehow transcendent through time and space, right? But that actually we are just an aggregate, like a cloud, like a tree, like an animal, like anything, right? And we are this wondrous experience of consciousness, of awareness, of processes going on, our blood flowing through our veins. So when we say this is the ultimate Yusuf, where is it? You know? Or Phap Luu or whoever. And so the insight we get from meditation, from the Buddha as well, the invitation that he offers us with this teaching is to look into ourselves and see that actually there's no essence we can call like a permanent entity or self. That everything is in flux, everything is changing all the time. And this is the Dhamma. By learning that, then we let go of our attachment even to this life, because we see that this only makes sense, this experience that we're having only makes sense when there's death, right? Living and dying cannot be separated one from the other. Life only has meaning in terms of death, and that insight is what we call the insight of no birth, no death. So seeing that, we're no longer attached to ideas of life and death, or coming and going and so forth, or a self that is somehow was before birth, didn't exist, and then suddenly popped into existence for a subscribed amount of time, and then disappeared after death. And so we fear that moment of disappearing, of going from being into non-being, but we don't realize that it's only a concept. And we can use any example to see that, but we still persist in our attachment. That I always talked about a cloud. A cloud never dies. It can only become the rain, the mist, the snow, the stream. It changes form and you wonder, what happened to my beautiful cloud? But it is, and you think the cloud has been destroyed. But if we have the insight of this tenet, we see that the cloud didn't ever have, in essence, a self. It's only a process that's constantly changing and transforming. And then we can appreciate the true beauty of the cloud, just like we can enjoy the true beauty of Yusuf when we see we're not caught in an idea that Yusuf is this, you see. Then it unlocks the entire wonder and beauty of the universe. Without that, we just get caught in our concepts and perceptions about one another. And we suffer, and we make the other person suffer because of our image of that person. So true love requires this insight of non-self. So we free ourselves from the image we have about our loved one, so that we can see them with the eyes of impermanence. And we realize, wow, it's such a wonder, this living mass body, breathing, aware, going on in the present moment. You see this, all the complexity and beauty of life. But if we are caught in an idea about ourselves, we just grasp onto the image we have of that person. We try to impose our image on our loved one and make them conform to what we want them to be. And that is not true love. Because there's no understanding of the nature of no self. So no self is not something to be afraid of. It actually unlocks the nature of love of the cosmos. It's a key to, it's a practice, a concentration, which leads us, it opens the door to unending beauty. Yeah. We can listen to a bell. Liberation from samsara does not mean putting an end to the personal self, because that person is not a real entity anyway. Nor does it mean putting an end to the precepts body. In the spiritual life. Yoi Tan. So in Vietnamese, the precepts body is Yoi Tan. And the spiritual life is the term Dui Mang. Dui Mang. Actually means insight, life, the life of insight, life of wisdom. Mang is like, yeah, lifespan. Dui Mang. And we already talked about Yoi Tan. Oh, sorry. Kan is going to correct me. Look on. So, We talked about Yaitan already in a few classes, the Shila Kaya, which means precepts body. It means our ethical way of living, what we do and what we don't do. So our practice of the 5 mindfulness trainings, our practice of the 14 mindfulness trainings. For monastics, we have the 10 novice precepts, and then the 250 precepts of a bhikshu, and some more for the bhikshuni. Those are words. The precepts are words, but when we put them into practice, we generate precepts, a precepts body. So it doesn't mean that if we don't practice the 5 mindfulness trainings, we don't have a precepts body. All of us have the things that we've learned from our parents, from our teachers. What, for example, most of us probably feel it's not okay to walk into a store and take whatever we want out of there and put it in our pocket. Not everybody agrees with that, but probably everybody here agrees with that. It's probably not the correct thing to do. So there's a sense of what is not to be done. That is our precepts body. It's also what is to be done, right? When somebody is suffering, and we stop what we're doing and we sit and we listen to that person so that we can understand their suffering and generate compassion. That is also the precepts body. That is something to be done. And our actions continue forever. Taisa, they go out. Even we cannot see what is being done all over the world, what is being thought, but those things are affecting us, and they are going out into the universe and having a real effect. So just because we say the self is not a real entity doesn't mean that ideas about a self don't have real effects on the world. So it's easy to say, oh, the self is just an idea, it's just a concept, and then go on to the next thing. But the problem is our ideas about ourselves, about other people, have real effects on our actions, the way we act, the way we think, the way we speak, and that is real. So the concept is just a concept, right? It's something we've created in our mind, which does have an effect, right? But so the focus of the Buddha's teaching is always on cause and effect. So understanding that, like we learned in the last tenet Thầy shared, even a thought can vibrate the entire universe. So the Buddha did this revolutionary thing. He said not only our bodily actions have effects on the world, also our mind, our thoughts have real effects on the world. So he was talking about psychology 2,600 years ago. It's amazing. Because it was quite common at that time. Many of you have heard of the Jain sect. And so there was already the insight that actions have real effects, and that being as non-violent as possible, ahimsa, can bring liberation. And the Jains, they practice that very diligently, to the point where the Buddha met a group of Jains who were just standing in the blazing sunlight of the midday without moving, because they didn't want to harm anything, even like in the earth, like small bacteria, or they maybe didn't think about bacteria, but small animals, small insects. And many Jains would even stop eating because they felt that the food must be gathered with some kind of violence, even if it's just vegetables. So plants, we have to uproot the plant, cut the plant. And so eventually, many of them would just die of inundation. So yes, it's important to practice non-violence. Is a form of violence. So, yes, cutting the leaves on the plant is some kind of violence, but we need food to live. And so he found a middle way, which is the way of the beggar. So his disciples became known as bhikshu, which means beggar. And so rather than cut their own, harvest their own food, their practice of non-violence was to accept whatever is offered to them. By going door to door and then with a bowl. And many monks practice going from house to house without skipping a house. That was a kind of ascetic practice you could do. Because you knew the houses that had good food. If you're begging for your food, you trust me, you will know which houses have good food and which houses don't have very good food. And so some monks, they would go to that, certain houses, but they would skip other houses. And so the Buddha allowed for one dhutanga, it's called, an ascetic practice, which was to go from house to house without interruption. You cannot skip a house. And then you get the food in your bowl and then you eat what you've gotten. And sometimes that was meat. Yeah. So the early Buddhist Sangha was not strictly vegetarian. We could not eat meat if we know that the animal was killed specifically for us. But if it was like an offering, that household was eating meat, and then they have some and they offer it to the monks, then the monks are allowed to eat it. And now we only occasionally go on alms round. And the lay sangha is very compassionate. They know that we like to eat vegetarian, so they offer vegetarian food when we do alms round. But at home we do cook for ourselves. And we try to buy products that cause less violence. Use organic food, local, as much as possible. But we're not perfect. But that's the spirit. The spirit is non-violence. And so begging for our food is a form of non-violent. But the Buddha didn't support for his monks to starve themselves to death. He sees that is a wrong understanding. That is a kind of violence to our own body, to our own mind. So the revolution of the Buddhist teaching is that we have what we call Samsāra. So here we talk about Samsāra, but this is a different Samskara with a K. Samskara means like a formation. So everything is a formation. Cloud is a formation, your body is a formation, this flower is a formation. Also our thinking is a formation. It means that everything comes to be due to causes and conditions. And the practice of meditation, an important part of it for me is looking in my own body and seeing how my thoughts give rise to speech, give rise to action. Because that is like when you get into the matrix of how things are generated. how the future, which is now the present, from a past that's already gone, has come to be. That's when things get really interesting. And you see how much actually power you have over your own life. It's all in your thinking, your speech, and your actions. Learning how to think in a non-violent way, to speak, which then leads to speech, which is non-violent, which also can lead to bodily action, which is kind, helpful, not harmful. So we noticed like, oh gosh, I had that thought, and that led to this. I said that thing to that person, they were hurt. And we reflect on it and we think, oh, okay, you see, I like personally the image of, in Upper Hamlet, in Plum Village, we have all these oak trees. The farmer who Tai and Sister Shan Kong bought Upper Hamlet from was a wine producer. He had vines. And he didn't want to sell the Upper Hamlet in 1982, but then there was a terrible hailstorm in the fall before he harvested the grapes, and it destroyed all his vines. And if you know a bit about wine and vines, the most precious thing are the vines. Because you can lose a crop 1 year, but if you lose the vines, you have to plant again, and it takes many years to produce the wine again. So we don't know what went through his mind at that time, but he decided after that, he didn't want to sell Upper Hamlet, but after that happened, I don't know, maybe he saw it was some kind of sign. He decided to sell the Upper Hamlet to the Sangha. So in order to protect his vines, he had planted these oak trees. And so if you go to the Upper Hamlet, this beautiful walking meditation path. And Tai often said that it was that path that made Tai fall in love with Upper Hamlet and want to make that the Plum Village. A beautiful path which goes through the oak trees. And you can, if you can't go there, you can see one of Walter's videos, because he's filmed people in some interviews right on that path. It's very, very beautiful. So one image I really love is, so when there's a mast year, then the oak trees produce many, many acorns. And I love to watch the acorns sprouting on the ground in the next spring. Or even in the fall they can sprout. And if you touch one of those oak trees, the old ones, the elders, they're so strong. Tai said they're like elephant, the legs of the elephant. When you drive to Upper Hamlet, because you're in the car, you cannot see the top of the trees, you just see the bark, and it's kind of like very quirky. And it looks like a herd of elephants. He used to tell us when you drive to Upper Hamlet, you're driving by the elephants. So it's very sturdy, very solid. But if you look at the acorn that's sprouting on the ground, just with a little nudge of my foot, I can stop. I can arrest the development of the acorn. And so that image I use all the time in my meditation around a thought and my speech and my actions. So you can observe it. You just have that, you know the moment you had that thought. And it's very tiny. It's like a little acorn. And you can just, if you just shift your attention to something else, then there's very little that is produced by that thought. But if you keep sticking there and mulling over it and kind of growing it, then the qualities of that thought will then spill out into your speech and into your bodily actions. just like the oak tree, and it can, if you continue, if that thought has anger, if it has jealousy, hatred, it can become like an oak tree of anger, an oak tree of hatred in your mind. The grooves in your neural pathways become deeply cut, and it's not easy to change the track. But if you learn to observe the quality of your thought very early, then it's not difficult to bring your attention to another object, like your breathing. So the breathing meditation is very helpful. It's always there. We're always breathing in and breathing out. So when we have a thought and we can see there's anger, there's resentment, just bring your attention back to your breathing. Don't continue to dwell on that thought. This is the fundamental practice. And so the poems that we learn, that we call gathas as a monk or nun, they are there to help us to, it's like a guided meditation. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours are before me. I vow to live them in mindfulness and look at all beings with eyes of compassion. So maybe the first morning you say that, sitting on your bed when you wake up, and in that moment you feel very inspired, but it doesn't seem to carry through. But then you do it another morning, and then a third, and then a week, and then months, and every morning waking up and making that commitment. And the energy produced by that is very powerful. So you're in that moment when, I don't know about you, but I notice that the moment when I wake up in the morning is a very dangerous moment in a way. My mind can somehow jump to some relationship that's not going so well, or some perception that I might have. And if I don't practice right away one thing that I do is I think about right away about my mom, or another loved one, my dad, or something, and then I feel compassion, understanding coming in, because I know that if I continue to dwell on that perception I have about that difficult person in my life, that I could, especially in that moment, I just woke up, I'm not ready to do a deep meditation on compassion and loving kindness to that person, then I might start watering the seed of resentment, upset, and anger. So the poem is there. Okay, now I've woken up, waking up this morning, I smile. Now how can you it's difficult to feel resentment when you are reciting that line. Waking up this morning, I smile. So right away you smile. So your body leads your mind. Usually we think that the mind leads the body, and that's true, but the body can also lead the mind. So when we develop a good habit, like stopping when we hear the sound of the bell, like we do here, then it becomes like, what do you call it? What's that when you like typing on the computer and it's like, it's automatic? What?
Muscle memory.
Mindful memory?
Muscle.
Muscle memory, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't. Yeah, it's like muscle memory. So for those of us, like I've lived in this community for 18 years. So my whole physiology changes when I hear the sound of a bell. It's just, I can't even, I never really tried, but like to not have it happen. When I hear the wake-up bell in the morning, my whole body goes in like to a kind of new physiological stage, and I can't sleep anymore. I just can't. I see my young brothers, and they hear the wake-up bell in the morning, and then they just remain there in bed just like snoring. And I said, how do they do that? Like I used to be able to do that when I was a novice. I just could sleep right through the wake-up bell, but I just can't do it anymore. So that's what you get after 18 years of being a monk. It's like my body's like, okay, there's a bell, it's time to get up. And everything starts moving and it's forget about, sleeping in. But some of my younger brothers are real masters at continuing to sleep. So that's a neural pathway, that's a kind of groove in my physiology. It's a good habit, I would say. I want to cultivate that habit. I want to be able to get up with the sound of the bell. I know that going to sitting meditation, or what I usually do, I sit up and I recite the gatha. Waking up this morning, I smile. 24 brand new hours are before me. I vow to live each moment in mindfulness and look at all beings with eyes of compassion. Because I know that I only started doing that a few years ago. I mean, I did it a bit as a novice, and then it fell by the wayside. And I rediscovered it because I knew that it changed the quality of my day. It made things, I started to look at beings with compassion more. I saw that the power of that vow is resonating through my experience of the day. And then usually I will light the little, we have an oil lamp in my room on the tea table. It's actually a tea rock. And then I'll make tea, and then sometimes my roommate joins. Before Brother Minim was my roommate, so he can tell you that all of this is true. And so it's like a morning ritual, and I think it's important to have that kind of ritual, whatever it may be. But it should be something that sets the tone for your whole day, so that you're going out into the world. In my case, I'm going out to sitting meditation, which is also helping me to set the tone for the day. Everything is designed here to set the tone of mindfulness and peace and non-violence. So these are ways of being able to deal with those oak trees, those really solid mental formations, samsāra, which just persist in our consciousness, like jealousy or hatred or something. I always try to practice in the spirit of this tenet to see that jealousy is just jealousy. It's not jealousy about someone. You might have an idea about someone, and then you're jealous about that idea, and you wish that idea was me. Like that quality that person has, I want to affix it to my idea of myself. Right? So you kind of like, okay, and you start to train yourself to become like a great singer because that person has a wonderful voice. And if I only had a wonderful voice like she does, then I would find like the perfect partner because they would love my voice. I don't know. You build it up in your mind. It's like, okay, if I just had this and like that, and then I will like find the right person that I can live my whole life with, and there'll be a happy ending to everything. So there's jealousy, and we think it's that person, but what I find very helpful is just to practice non-self and see that it's just jealousy. So removing the kind of notion, and then get in touch with the visceral experience of the emotion. So jealousy, how does it feel? Not like my idea, that thinking about that quality which that other person has, and I want to have it myself. But how does it feel in my gut? Like, how do I feel? What's going on in there, hormonally? And just getting in touch with that. Because that's what sticks a long time. That's the difficult stuff. The stuff down in the gut. It's like, we use the word trigger now, but I feel it's simplistic. Because it's so mechanical somehow, trigger like a gun. But actually, it's much more complex what's going on. There's a lot of things that are being stimulated. And so the Buddha had this insight. He said, okay, suffering is because of this, these formations. Well, this formation can be anything, right? But it's particularly chitta samskara. It means a thought formation, chitta samskara. And so that's why his teaching focused on this psychology of his students, because he saw that all the other stuff will it sorts itself out as long as you can take care of your mind. A well-trained mind leads to happiness and ease. There's nothing as unsettling, as painful, that creates more suffering than an untrained mind. Wars, violence of all kinds, slavery, genocide, they're just the products of our mind and discrimination at a mass scale, right? At a collective scale. So when we come together in Deer Park and we practice mindfulness, it's to uproot our perceptions, our discrimination, but not to uproot ourself, right? It's to realize that there's no self. And the same is true of our mental formations. When we look deeply into jealousy, we see that there's this wondrous, myriad, complex situation going on in our physiology. And now neuroscientists are seeing that what they thought were just hardwired emotions are actually constructed. That I don't experience jealousy in exactly the same way that Min An might experience jealousy or anger. And that these systems are also based on our previous experiences of anger or previous experiences of jealousy. And so that the formation is actually changing throughout time. So even you're feeling jealous today, it's not exactly the jealousy that you felt yesterday. And that's good news because it means that it's impermanent. It's changing. Just like the oak tree, if you pay attention, it's not permanent. It's also growing and changing. So by cultivating good habits, then there's a chance to actually change the situation of this oak tree, which we feel we cannot change. This anger, which we feel that's constantly dominating us and taking over our life, that it actually does have a source of nutriment in our thinking, and we can change it. You can listen to a bell. I was paying attention to how my body, the physiological changes that happen when I hear the sound of the bell. It's calm and also an awareness that I don't want to plan what I'm going to say next. I just want to be in a space that's clear and open, so that, because I find that that's where new insight arises. If my head is crowded with thinking, it's very difficult to get real insight. So the bell helps me I see right away my mind goes, not thinking to the next thing, but just observing like the space of the body, the mind. Okay, so we say, okay, there's not a real self, right? A personal self. And I understand that I don't want to try to destroy myself or destroy my ego. But what about, if there's no self, then, where's all this practice going? What is the purpose of the spiritual life? So that's a kind of fear that people have when they touch no self, and they see it as a non-being. They think, oh gosh, all this time I thought I was. Now I learn Buddhism and I find out that I'm not. And that's scary. So it's not that you were, and then suddenly now you're not, right? Because this, like the Buddha taught about these two extremes of being and non-being that we learned about. And so there's actually this middle way, which is neither being nor non-being. So the point is not that the self was there and then now it's not there, but the point is that actually what we thought was a self was just perception. And now we have that insight, so we can go deeper. That's the middle way. So we don't get caught in being or non-being, same, different, coming and going, birth and death. We don't get caught in those notions anymore. And so that doesn't mean that there's nothing. It means that there's this awareness. So the whole teaching is not just ontological for the sake of saying something is like this, but it's for the sake of awakening, of liberation. Okay, so the precept body continues, right? So when we get the insight that there's no personal self, it doesn't mean that our life of practice just evaporates. This is a kind of, they talk about crazy wisdom, right? Sometimes there's this tradition in Zen where somebody is just, their level of attainment is so high that they can go and have sex and make money, go to whatever, to crazy things, and everyone's very impressed, like, wow, he must have a real deep attainment. And this is a very popular teaching in the West, because it sounds more attractive than letting go of our craving. And so, be careful what you do with your mind, right? So the precepts body, it doesn't mean we don't have a precepts body. It's very difficult, I find, to meet psychotherapists, psychologists, psychiatrists who are willing to talk about the ethical behavior of their patients. With their patients. And I always wonder about that. I guess it's maybe some kind of institutional thing. For us as monks and nuns, it's so obvious. That guy's sleeping with somebody else's wife. No wonder he's having so much suffering. But if you just look at his, he comes in there and then you just give him a bunch of pills, or to deal with his suffering, but you don't go to the root of how he's living his life. I think there's a real, I mean, it's not getting to the root of what's really affecting that person's experience of suffering or happiness. It's not to say that people don't have mental illness, or that people who have mental illness have done something wrong. That's not the point. The point is we need to look at how we're living our life and see the ways in which when we act out of anger, hatred, or jealousy, that has real effects on our experience of well-being. So don't fall into that trap of like, okay, there's no self, well, I can do anything then. Right? That's what the mindfulness trainings are there, to help us to see that we have a body, and so we need to learn how to kind of like find manners of the body, how to live our life in a way that is non-violent towards ourselves and towards others. So we do have those fine manners as a monastic. And the brothers, usually when you become a novice, or even as an aspirant, you already study the fine manners of a monk. And all of those is a way of, for example, we always do things with two hands. So if I give the pen to Brother Min An, I would hand it to him with two hands, so that I practice to be 100% with what I'm doing. It's not for the sake of like holding the marker better. It's for the sake of having one-pointed awareness. I give this marker to someone, and I'm not like making myself a drink on the other side or something. Yeah, like I can just like hand this over here. Oh yeah, and I'm teaching this class, and here, can you take that? You see? And then you're not completely there with giving the thing, and you're not completely there with what you're saying and you're teaching. So we have not talking while walking. I don't practice it perfectly, but I see the benefits of that practice. Myself and another brother, we've been leading hiking retreats. And before I became a monk, I did a lot of hiking, and especially on the Appalachian Trail. And I love, like some conversations I had while hiking were like conversations, I remember almost every sentence from those conversations. And so when I came to Plum Village and I learned like we have to practice not talking while walking, I was like, what? You know, I love to go for walks with people and have conversations, and why? I mean, I can't do that anymore. I felt deprived. And but then through the years, I started to see, and especially lately, leading hiking retreats, I saw how dispersed the energy becomes when we are talking while we're walking. And actually the benefit we get from those conversations is not very much. But what we lose is the awareness of our steps, because it's very difficult to be aware of your breath and aware of your steps while you're having a conversation and walking. So when we did the hiking retreat on the Appalachian Trail in 2018, it was the second to last week, and we were coming down off of into Harper's Ferry in West Virginia, and from the north. And our group, it was really, really wet, and we just spent this night in a kind of deluge of, like, I mean, it was just insane amounts of water. And we had been at this campground that actually had a bathroom. I mean, it had like a building. I mean, I'm not talking about a privy. It had like a building with electricity and flush toilets. I have to be very specific. And we had converted this bathroom into like a massive drying rack. Like we had our clothes hanging everywhere inside this bathroom, because that's the only dry place. And I remember I had like just this one dry change of clothes in this waterproof bag within my backpack. And so I was aware, I was like, there was this little world of dryness there in that bag.
And so but I somehow, we have a lovely lay friend, Ramon from Catalonia, and he's like a real mountain goat. He's outside all the time, skiing or hiking or whatever. And so he came along to help us on that trip. So we usually ate dinner together. And it was just pouring rain. So I said, there were these picnic tables. And I said, Ramon, we have to set up a tarp. Because I wanted to sit at a table. I mean, it was just so wet and kind of wet and cold and everything that is just, you know, you just want to have, like, can I sit at this picnic table? Just a little bit of dryness. And he thought I was crazy because he's like, we'll just set up our camping hammocks and we'll cook underneath our hammock. And I was like, no, we're going to set up a tarp. And so we set up this tarp. And he went and took a shower, and then I was like, okay, I have my little bit of dryness. And so I went into guarding the dryness of that change of clothing, went and took a shower, a hot shower. Oh, it's wonderful. Put on the dry clothes, and I had the umbrella, and I managed to make it back under the tarp. And he had like prepared dinner, and not only that, he prepared this like bouillon, you know, those little cubes, and they're great for when because you lose salt when you're hiking. So we would drink that instead of tea. When we'd stop, we'd just heat up like some water with a bouillon cube. So he had made this hot cup of bouillon. And I sat down in my dry clothes under the tarp at the picnic table. I was like, wow, life is good. And he passed over the bouillon, and the bottom of the cup hit a plank that was raised from the picnic table. And the entire like big cup of bouillon spilled all over my dry clothes. And it was like a moment of shock, like disbelief. Like, here's like he's one of my closest friends. And, you know, what do you do when it's like you've guarded this little world of dryness and you've managed to keep everything dry, and then that moment when it just all like collapses. And so I remember that moment, that like this was a moment when I had a mental formation. Because there was like my lost dryness, which my mind was still grasping after. I was still wanting that dryness to be part of my reality, and it wasn't. And so I was looking out for somebody to blame, someone outside to say, like, to yell at because of my lost dryness. And there was Ramon, who had done the nicest thing. I mean, he'd prepared, while I was in a shower, he had prepared this wonderful hot cup of bouillon with absolutely no intention to spill it all over me. And yet that is what happened. And it was really like a key moment for me in this whole, we were hiking for 7 weeks on the Appalachian Trail, and we're leading the retreats, right? And I was like, oh gosh. Ramon! Anyway, so I learned to nudge the acorn seed, even in that moment, and say, well, this is it. I'm wet. I've got hot, greasy bouillon all over my pants, and I don't know what I'm going to sleep in tonight, but you know. And you know, I couldn't be, and it was a lot because I had a good spiritual friend. I mean, it was great that it wasn't like somebody that I couldn't stand, or you know, I don't know. Right, but a good friend did that. You know, I know, of course, it's no intention, but yet there's the hot soup on my legs, right? So anyway, that was one story about how to like really look in those moments when anger's coming up, to just change the attention, accept reality. Again and again and again and again and again. Don't keep clinging onto your idea, because it's not going to help, right? It's like trying to pick up spilled milk. It doesn't work. So the next day when we were, I just remember our whole group, we were about 10 people. And I thought, wow, I'm gonna have to face the most miserable group of hikers ever after this storm. And I think, why did I sign up for this week of hiking with this monk, these monks? And instead I saw all these smiling faces standing in front of the bathroom. And I said, okay, well, so normally we're hiking to another shelter tonight. And then after that, we finish on Friday. But we could hike 16 miles today and get to a hostel where it's dry. And so everyone in the group wanted to hike 16 miles and get to dry. They wanted to get to that world of dryness, which they no longer even vaguely remembered. And so we were hiking quite quickly that day. So we decided as a group to do that. And in those hiking retreats, we would practice not walking while talking in the morning. We would practice silence in the morning until we ate lunch. And then after the 2 sounds of the bell, we would start speaking. And then in the afternoon, we could have conversations. So, and there was one friend in the group who had been, that was actually his second week of hiking with us. Usually people came for a week at a time. And as we were hiking down into Harper's Ferry, there was a friend who, actually I'd met here at Deer Park back in 2008. If you go to the brother's office, we'd frame the windows there, because he's a good carpenter. You know, that long window at the end of the brother's office. So I learned how to frame windows from him. And he has a farm in Virginia with his wife, who's a poet. And so we hadn't talked in many years. And so we're having this conversation coming down the mountain, and I'm at the front of the group. And it was such an interesting conversation because it was around how he wanted to grow soybeans on their farm, but like it was so difficult, he couldn't get them to grow. And he saw like, well, what is the forest growing? It's growing deer. And so he made the decision, even though he practices the mindfulness trainings, that, you know, he and his family would harvest about 2 deer every year. And of course, as Buddha, you know, as practitioners, we don't kill. But he's asking a real serious question, which is, well, I can enter into the industrial food production system and eat vegan, or I can try to, you know, live simply. And so that was the decision that he had made. So we're having a conversation about this. And the one friend who was behind us, suddenly he just cried out. He said, "I can't do this anymore." And I stopped. I was leading the group. He said, "There's an interesting conversation happening, and I can't hear it. And our pace is slowed down, and we said we'd hike 16 miles to get to the hostel, and blah, blah, blah," you know, it came out like this. And I realized that, wow, I was really, as the leader of the group, I was so caught in this conversation, which was really interesting and like typical trail conversation. And I had lost complete awareness of the rest of the group. I had lost awareness of my step. And I could have gotten, again, angry, but I'd been practicing. Right? And I saw, like, this is a bell of mindfulness. Right? You know, as monks and nuns, when we lead something, we have to practice as well with our pride and be humble and say, okay, when somebody is complaining, of course we can just say, oh, they're entitled and da-da-da-da, whatever. But if we're, I think, deeper practitioners, we can actually see it as a bell of mindfulness. And so that's what in that moment I said, you're right. Like, we're not being mindful of our steps anymore. And so as a group, we decided let's look at it again, even though we're supposed to have conversation in the afternoon. That's like the rule. We can change it. We can come to a new decision, and we made a decision together we call it a Sangha karman. So karma is action, and Sangha is a collective. So collectively we made a decision that we're okay, until we get to the hostel, we're going to walk in silence. So we can really enjoy our steps and be aware of the whole group. So that is a story to share a little bit about the precepts body, how if we're, in that moment, if I'm caught in my idea of myself, like I am the leader of this group, how dare you speak like that? I am the mindfulness master. I get caught in an idea like that. It's very funny. Like, who are you to tell me? And we said that we could have a conversation in the afternoon. Right? That would be a kind of immature response, still based on an idea of a self. But when I just get in touch that we are not separate, we are a collective, we are a body, and then I can go deeper and I can see, well, what is the energy like now? And I see that a person's anger is part of it. It's also my anger. And it's part of the group. Now it's become part of the group. And so how do we take care of this? Just like we do in our own mind. So the collective psychology, we take care of it in the same way we take care of our own mind. That's why it's so essential, this revolutionary insight of the Buddha on transforming our psychology, because it has a collective effect. When we can transform our own mind, we can transform the mind of others. And the precepts body of the Buddha is still here with us today. It is still strong. And it grows stronger with every person who practices the mindfulness trainings. So if we are caught in the Buddha as Siddhartha Gautama, who lived 2,600 years ago, and we say, well, he passed away a long time ago. He's an historical figure. But when we look at the precepts body of the Buddha, we see that it has continued until this day and grown to all over the world. So there's no separate self, but the precepts body continues. The spiritual life continues. The insight, wisdom of the Buddha continues in the present. And the same is true for each of us. Our practice of the precepts continues in our friends, our family, our students, our community, as well as our insight. It continues out. So that all continues, and there's no impediment. There doesn't need to be a self. For the cloud to continue to become the rain and the mist, it doesn't need to have a self. Any self the cloud would have is only added on top. It can function just fine. It can become rain, snow, ice, without any, there's no need to add some essential nature of the cloud for it to share its beauty. And so that is true of us as well. And that insight helps us to become free of our deep-seated anger and jealousy. So thank you for listening this week. And I wish you a Merry Christmas.